now. So I start swimming in. I'm exhausted. I start going down, just like in the movies. You see the surface of the water go like I'm holding my breath, but I'm like, see the surface of the water going, man, I can't swim anymore. I can't. And then I popped out of my body. It's the only way I can describe it. My mind kind of popped out, but I was not unfamiliar with it. I was familiar with that experience because I've been meditating for 2 years.
Hi, and welcome back to the Natalie Rustic podcast. Today's guest is author and spiritual teacher, Kelvin Chin. Today, he will be sharing his near-death experience with you all, but also his teaching on meditations as taught by Maharishi himself, which then led Kevin to teach meditation for the next 40 plus years of his life and how to overcome the fear of death. And today we get to learn about it. So guys, without further ado, I welcome you, Kelvin Chin.
Yeah, just for the audience's purpose, we'll get to the NDE, but bottom line is the meditation saved my life, and you'll hear the story in a minute. But so yeah, I learned to meditate when I was a teenager. I was really stressed out. I was not into spiritual stuff. I mean, I didn't know what spirituality was when I was a teenager, really. I mean, I went to church because my parents said we had to go to church. So that's why I went to church. And I didn't really pay much that close attention. I wasn't really into it. But so if you would ask me when I was a teenager what spirituality, I'd say, well, it was probably going to church or so. I didn't really know all what I know now. And so when I learned to meditate, I did not learn for spiritual reasons. I learned because I was so stressed out. I was highly anxious. I was in my second year of university at the time, and I was so I thought I was going to flunk out. I seriously thought I was going to flunk out because my mind was so foggy. I had so much brain fog. I thought that I can't remember anything. I just so stressed out. And so I happened to stumble across a meditation class on campus. And what attracted me was that the guy in the lecture was talking about some new scientific research that was just being conducted down in Boston, Massachusetts. I was going to school up at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. And so a couple hours down the road, Boston, this Harvard Medical School professor was starting to do some research. He was just starting it. So the guy was talking about it. And I went, whoa, my ears perked up because I was a science major initially, right? And so I thought, whoa, science? What? Meditation? Anxiety? Help reduce my cortisol, balance my cortisol levels out, adrenaline, lactic acid. Those are the only three that I remember. I can't remember the other ones. But all these other hormones and chemicals and stuff. And it turns out I took the class, and then within 6-7 months, I was in the experiment. I was a test subject in the experiment. So I was 20, 21 years old. So, so what I learned first then at that time was Transcendental Meditation, TM for short, taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the guy who taught the Beatles in the late 60s and blah, blah, blah. So I learned several years after that. And I studied with him personally a couple of different times, and then I became a TM teacher. I was a senior. I was a kind of a senior leader or a international leader in his organization for about 10 years. Traveled around the world teaching and so forth. Taught the first meditation courses in the history of West Point Military Academy here in the U.S. It's for the training U.S. Army officers. I taught in Korea in the U.S. Army.
So you brought meditation to the military in order to help them with
stress. And the big problem they were having then was drug and alcohol issue, drug abuse, and alcohol abuse. And so that's how I got in. But I taught everybody. They didn't have to have drug and alcohol issues, but that's how we got in easily, bureaucratically, because the problem was so great that you said, yeah, bring them in. So I was in my 20s, and I was teaching in the U.S. military, Air Force also. I had the equivalent of a major, like the officer title, a major in the U.S. Army, which is like they were like 35, 40 years old. I'm 20, and they were,
Yeah.
I had the civilian equivalent ranking is the word, I
You
guess, the rank.
definitely found your calling, Kelvin.
Yeah, it was crazy. And so I've been teaching ever since, that ever since, and I've taught thousands of people. I'm in 60 countries now, and I teach on Zoom like this, all
Yeah.
right. So yeah, so that's kind of the meditation part, but the NDE part was like, so I'd been meditating when this near-death experience happened for me. I didn't even know what a near-death experience was. I just knew that I almost died. I almost
Mm.
drowned. And I had been meditating 2 years at that time. So this was a long time ago. I'd been meditating for 2 years. I went to a summer intensive language program. So I switched from pre-med, I switched to French major, and then I started to study Chinese because I have a Chinese background, but my parents didn't teach us any Chinese. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to learn Chinese? So I started studying intensive Chinese. So I went to this intensive summer program at the University of California in San Diego. And the fact that it's in California is important to the story because, as I said earlier, I grew up in Boston and, went to school in New England. I'd never been to the West Coast of the US. I'd never been in the Pacific Ocean before in my life. So I flew to the West Coast for the summer, and for the program, this intensive language program, like a year's worth in 2 months or something. And I ran into this girl at registration, and we found out that, oh, she goes to a college near mine back east. Oh, she's never been to the Pacific Ocean either. Hey, since class starts tomorrow, let's go down to the beach this afternoon after we register. She said, oh, great. So I met her back at registration. We walked, and those of you in your audience may know UCSD is in La Jolla, California, and the beach is literally, you walk across campus down a driveway to the beach. It's right there. So we walked down to the beach, and there, a beautiful June day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. Really nice, hot, warm day, beautiful. Nobody on the beach, just the two of us on the beach. And it's a state park right there that stretches for, I don't know, 3 miles or something. And there was nobody there on our section of the beach, 0 people. And there's never any lifeguards. So they don't have lifeguard stations at this state park at all.
Yeah.
So we're there, we go in the water, we dunk into, because it was hot, we're sweating and hot. So I'm probably in about waist deep or a little bit shallower water, and I just dunked underwater. She must have been about maybe 15 feet away from me. I saw her going like, she's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. I'm
Mm.
getting pulled out in the ocean in what's called a rip current. And
Yeah.
you guys have those, I know, in
Yeah,
Australia.
I've been caught in one as a child as well, so
You
I
have.
know.
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, it's scary, right? I mean,
Yeah.
whoa. I mean, because when you're in it, so people who don't know what a rip current is, it's a river in the ocean. That's what it is, basically. It's a current, it's a river, and sometimes they can move really fast, and this one was moving really fast. They don't have them where I grew up. I've been in the ocean around
Yeah.
and Boston stuff. They don't have rip currents there, but they're all over the Pacific. They're all over the world, but Pacific has them. And so I found out firsthand. And so I see, and at this state park, there are 300-foot high cliffs at Torrey Pines State Park. And so I'm seeing the cliffs going like this. And so I know I'm moving fast, because
Mm.
when you're in the rip current, you don't know how fast you're moving, because all the water around you is moving. In a car, you don't know, unless you look out the windows, you wouldn't know how fast you're moving, right?
Mm.
Because everything in the car is moving. So same thing in a rip current. So I'm like, whoa, I panicked. It's 20
Mm.
years old. I panicked, right? I'm freaking out. And I forgot all my Boy Scout training, which is, if this happens to anybody in the audience, maybe this will save their lives or their children or grandchildren. You swim at an angle to the beach because you want to try to see if you can get out of the current rather than go right straight back into what pulled you out, which is what I
Mm.
was doing. So I forgot about all that. I'm trying to swim straight back in. I'm getting exhausted, and I'm going nowhere. I'm not moving. I can tell by the cliffs, and I might be even getting pulled out farther. By the way, so in a matter of how many seconds that was, or a minute, I wasn't timing, I was just freaking out, panicking. But my friend told me, he's a merchant seaman, he used to be
Mm.
captains in these big, huge ships now and stuff. I said, Cayman, so if it was 3 or 4 inches tall, the 300-foot high cliffs, how far out was I? He said 1.7 miles, almost 2 miles out. So it's like I was almost, what's that, 4 or 5 kilometers out in a matter of a minute, maybe. So I'm freaking out. So I start swimming in. I'm exhausted. I start going down, just like in the movies. You see the surface of the water go like this. I'm holding my breath, but I'm like, see the surface of the water going, man, I can't swim anymore. I can't. And then I popped out of my body. It's the only way I can describe it. My mind kind of popped out, but I was not unfamiliar with it. I was familiar with that experience because I'd been meditating for 2 years. I knew what being unaware of body and surroundings is usually what I call it in my meditation class, because I don't want to freak people out and say, you might pop out of your body. But it's just, you're unaware of body and surroundings. The mind is still aware, but the body is doing something else. I was familiar with that experience. And that happened when I was going down. I was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet down below the water now. And that happened. And I recognized it, and I willed myself back. Will is too strong a word, but willing, I desired, I said, no, get back in the body. I just had a desire to go back in my body, and my mind went back in my body. And I struggled to the surface. Now, if I had what I call in my classes, I call them a classic NDE, which probably many of your guests have described. Wow, I'm on the other side. I saw the light, or my dead grandmother, or Buddha, or Jesus, or God came to you, an angel came, that kind of classical NDEs. Those
Mm.
usually last for a minute, two
Mm.
minutes, an
Yeah.
hour, sometime, long time. I would have been dead, because my body's still going down in I don't know how deep it's very deep there, but I'm probably in about 60, 70, 80 feet of water. I would have been down. No way I would have been able to struggle to get to the surface, but I struggled to get about 4 or 5 feet back up to the surface. I flipped over my back. I took a breath of obviously a gasp of air. The only thought I remember was, don't hurry. That's all I remember, was don't hurry, because I
Mm.
was panicking before. So I had the presence of mind to say, don't hurry, to myself. And I just took my time, and I must have got out of the rip current somehow. And my friend, she stayed on the beach. She said she didn't want to go and help because she wanted to keep her eye on me. And she said it took about an hour for me to swim back in. I passed out when I got on the beach for about a half hour, she said.
Wow. Wow.
But meditation saved my life, because I recognized what was happening. If I
Yeah.
had classic NDE where people are going, oh my, oh wow, oh that's amazing, oh wow, I feel so peaceful, my body still be going down, 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 down. I no way I've
Mm.
been able to get up to the surface.
That voice that told you to slow down, do you believe that could have been your guides or your higher self explaining
Who
that?
knows? I
Mm.
was so overwhelmed at the time, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And plus I had never had since 1986, I started having experiences communicating with the other side, so I can tell the difference now. But this was 1972. I didn't know I wouldn't have been able to tell. But
Mm.
whether it was this or that, I couldn't tell anyway, because I was so overwhelmed that whether the voice was mine or somebody else's whispering to me from the other side, who knows? One of my guys, I don't know. All I
Yeah.
know, I had the thought and I followed it. I just stopped.
What's really incredible is I've had a guest on my podcast before who had a drowning experience similar to you, and she also heard a voice. And I
Hmm.
wonder if that's something that's connected to drowning, maybe that's where you're able to hear other senses because you can't feel, you can't breathe, so all you can do is hear, and that's
Yeah,
when the voices come in.
yeah, maybe.
Mm.
Maybe because I was panicking so much I couldn't think of anything. I don't know. I just know I was panicking. That's all it's 20 years old, I
Yeah.
just remember I was just freaking out. I was just freaking out. I thought, this is it. This is it.
So I've learned somewhere there that you've meditated about 40,000 times.
Yeah, you heard me say that's funny. I
Yeah.
estimate because I've been meditating for 52 years. So that's just a ballpark estimate. Somewhere around 40,000 times I've meditated because I meditate every day, twice a day. Plus, I've been on a bunch of retreats, we'll call meditation retreats, where sometimes I meditate for, I've been on meditation retreats for a weekend, a week, 2 weeks, a month, two
Mm,
months. I went on a 6-month retreat once. That's the longest one I've ever been on. Every day, all day meditating for 6 months over in
that's
Europe.
incredible.
Yeah. So
That must have
I
changed your life dramatically because I've
yeah, to be honest, I don't advise it. I wouldn't recommend it for most people, because I saw some people start to get imbalanced.
mm,
I was fine. I think there's a small subset of people who can handle it, and I think uh, handle it means what? Well, that means that you could, because you're mega releasing garbage. So handle it means you can handle the mega releasing of the garbage. Some people can't handle the releasing of too much too quickly, and
mm.
so it's not something I recommend to people. I did it. This was many years ago in my 20s. I did it, and you know, I was fine. But not everybody was. I was in charge of 75 guys in my hotel. There were probably about 2 to 3,000 people around France and Switzerland at the time, all at the same time, the same
Mm.
6 months I was there, um, doing this. And Maharishi would travel around to visit the different hotels. But I was like right near his hotel. Our hotel was like right down the street from his hotel. He came and visited us a lot. I was the kind of on-site, I don't know, on-site director, on-site manager of the attendees in my hotel. So I was a participant, but I kept an eye on the other ones, and I had to deal with some of them who got a little imbalanced. So it's not something I recommend, but yeah, I've meditated a lot.
You learnt through Maharishi, I believe. And so is he the same person that taught, is it the Beatles,
Yeah,
how to meditate?
yeah, yep,
And
yep.
and that was transcendental meditation. Could you give us an understanding as to why transcendental meditation is so largely known rather than other modalities?
I think a big part of it was the Beatles, to be honest,
Mm,
because Maharishi was teaching since 1959, and it was just small groups of people in Los Angeles and Chicago and New York. So it was just small groups of people and then he taught them in the fall of 1967, and they went to India and studied with him, or were supposed to study with him. They ended up writing the White Album basically in India at his ashram. Almost all the songs on the White Album were written at the ashram when they were supposed to be meditating. Like
I'm
the
gonna have
song
to listen to that now.
that now. So like, for example, the song "Dear Prudence,"
Mm,
can you come out and play? That lyric, "Dear Prudence,"
yeah.
is Mia Farrow's sister, and Prudence Farrow was there with Mia Farrow, the actress. And so Prudence was there, and they were trying to get Prudence to come out of her room because Prudence was doing what she was supposed to be doing, which is meditating, and the Beatles
Mm.
were not. So they wrote a song about "Dear Prudence, can you come out and play?" And the chorus of that is round and round and round you go. I think round and round and round.
Yeah.
The chorus in Dear Prudence, and around was what Maharishi called meditation, pranayama, alternate nostril breathing, and a set of yoga asanas. That was one round.
Mm.
So we would do multiple rounds each day. A round consisted of those three things. So that's a little backstory on where that song came from and why the chorus is that. So, but yeah, they were there in February 1968. I have friends who are much older than I am, but they have since passed away, who were there with the Beatles, so forth.
Yeah.
There were about 40 people there, I think, altogether.
Do you mind sharing with us how transcendental meditation works? And you mentioned the nostril breathing. Can you take us through what you do?
Well, so what I do is, I don't teach TM anymore,
Mm.
but I'll talk a little bit about TM, and then I'll talk about what I do that's a little bit different. But TM's a great technique, and they have, they have centers around the world and so forth. And as I said, I was an international leader in his organization for about 10 years. I was the first national leader of the TM organization in Hong Kong, and I coordinated about 8 countries. I was like,
So you brought it to Hong Kong.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he brought it to Hong Kong first, Maharishi, because he came through Hong Kong, I think, on his way from India to Los Angeles. I think I'm not
Mm,
exactly sure of his exact itinerary, but it was something like that. So he had stopped off in Hong Kong before I got there and taught a bunch of people and so forth.
yeah.
And there was a British civil engineer who was working full time as a civil engineer who had also learned how to teach. So he was teaching part time a little bit, but then I went there as the first person to teach full time, and I was organized it, throughout the. It was then a colony, British Crown colony, before the Chinese took it over in the 90s.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I taught, like, from multi-billionaires to construction worker ditch diggers, everybody in between.
Yeah.
You know, we taught several thousand people when I was there. So yeah, and so TM is a very easy technique. I've made it easier in terms of what I teach. I call it turning within meditation, and I've removed all the cultural stuff. So that's why I can teach across 60 countries now, because I've removed all the cultural trappings, I call them. Anything that looks culturally Indian
Mm,
or Hindu-ish or Indian-ish or Vedic tradition-ish. I've
mm,
removed all that stuff because I think the technique can stand on its own, and I have made it easier. So I've changed it in certain respects. I've removed some of the cognitive dissonance in the teaching. There's some inconsistencies in some of the, they say this but do this, and some of the alignment is a little bit off. So I've fixed all that, and so
mm,
what I teach now I call turning within. But Maharishi is the guy. I continue to say this publicly, that he will be known historically for
mm.
the Indian guru who finally said to the world, meditation can and should be easy and not
Mm.
involve concentration, not involve clearing the mind, not try to control them.
Yeah.
None of that,
Right.
not focus the mind. He's going to be the guy, I think, 50, 100, 150, 500, 1,000 years from now. That's what he's going to be known for, not all the other stuff that he got into after I
Mm.
after I left the organization. They get into all kinds of other stuff. I think that's all going to all drop away. He's going to be known for that guy who said meditation can and should be easy if you understand how the mind works.
Right, right. I will tell you something just before you dive into what you do, but
Yeah.
I actually had my first outer body experience that I can fully recall. And this was 2 days ago.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, it was incredible. So I've wanted to do it for so long, and I focused on, now's the time. I'm going to leave my body and I'm going to see what it's like to astral travel. But it's funny. The one time I actually left my body is the one time I didn't think about it. There was no intentions. I didn't
Right.
clear my mind. And
Right.
that's why I brought that up, because of what you just said.
Yep.
I just let go completely and just surrendered to the feeling.
The 2 words you just said, let go. If you ask any of my turning within meditation students,
Mm,
those are the 2 words I tell my students. That's how
right.
look. There's a technique that I teach that helps you get from point A to point B. Okay.
Mm,
So everybody's at point A. You want to get to point B. There's a technique that helps you get there, but it's not about the technique. The technique is simply a tool that helps us get from A to B. Really, I tell my students to use those 2 words you just said. That's how I tell them to define what I'm teaching them, how to let go. Let go to what?
mm,
Let go of their old baggage, their old stress and strain, their old patterns that are limiting, and let go and allow the mind to expand its conscious capacity for
yeah.
experience. That's the thing. Can we expand our conscious capacity so that we get out of what I call the little 8-inch bucket part of our mind, which is
Mm,
self-limiting, right? And so that's what happened to you. You allowed, that's the other word that I use when I teach, is you allowed your mind to do what it just naturally was.
Yeah. So what
So,
I was doing is I had a podcast just recently with a man named Jimmy Wilson, and he was telling me, because I have anxiety, depression, and I was very raw and open about the things that I go through. And he was explaining to me that a psychic told him, in order to heal anxiety, you can do a form of meditation where you embody a light. You have a white blue light surrounding you. And when you focus on your chakra system, your energy centers, imagine an infinity sign in each chakra connecting to the central sun, going into the universe and back around, and also letting go of the negative energies. And once you envision the negative energy leaving each chakra, you send it into a Merkaba, into the universe, and let go. And it sounds crazy, but it's all to do with intention and visualization. So I tried that, and I didn't think I was going to go out of body at all. I was just focusing on my root chakra. So I did exactly what he mentioned. And I slipped into a state of not quite asleep and not quite awake. And I found myself standing in a field. And I had this strange feeling whilst I was in this field. I couldn't feel my legs. I was like, oh, am I dying? What's going on? Because I thought it was real where I was. I thought it was real. And I was like, okay, I can feel myself coming out of myself. This is the strangest feeling. And I surrendered in that space. And I just was like, okay, I let go. Next minute, I opened my eyes in my actual body, and I'm like, oh, that was just a dream. No, that wasn't a dream. And then next minute, I tried to get up, but my body was paralyzed. And next minute, I shot out of my body. That was when I astral traveled. And
hmm,
it was the most freeing feeling I've ever felt. But it was at the moment that I let go of all fear that it happened. And
yeah.
so I feel like it's so powerful to talk about letting go of all fears and just letting God or source just work through you.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you must be uh prone to being able to do this because not everybody is. And
Yeah.
so, and so what I do is different
Mm.
because the key words you said in terms of the technique that you were doing is intention and visualization. Well, those those can work for some people, and some people they have zero to no effect. Because
Mm.
why? Because if if the cup is only this big, then that's how much that's the power of intention. It's that big. If your cup is this big, your power of intention is going to be stronger. If your cup is this big, your attention and your ability to visualize could be so much greater than a cup is this big.
Mm.
So everybody's cup is different sizes, and the same person's cup changes different at different, but it's the same
Yes.
person. It's never the same. For the same person, it's never the same. So what I my approach is different. So an analogy that I give you is like those what I call content oriented techniques where there's content, there's intention, there's visualization, there's some content that you pick
Mm.
yourself this way or think about this. There's content there. Okay. That's more like, so the analogy is like we have a big deck ship with a big deck on it, and the deck is like our mind, and the deck chairs, 100 200 deck chairs, those are like our thoughts, emotions, mental patterns, our visualization, our ability there. Those are content oriented stuff, the deck
Mm.
chairs. There's nothing wrong with moving them around. It can have a positive effect, but my approach is different. What I teach is people how to expand the deck size. So now the deck is twice as big, or 5 times, or 20 times, 100 times, 1,000 times bigger. Look at what you can do with the deck chairs. So my
Yeah.
approach is different. It's a different approach. So there's nothing wrong with moving deck chairs around, but how about increasing the size of the deck? That's a game changer,
That's
right?
right. Can I ask you, with obviously meditating around 40,000 or more times in your life, you must have
Who's
had some
counting?
pretty
Yeah, right.
wild experiences. Um, Do you mind sharing with us some of the places you may have visited, realities, places? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. First of all, it's more, I mean, I've had experiences like that, but what's more intimate and more significant, and to me, I'm a pragmatist, so I'm very practical oriented. It's like what's most useful for me, in other words, in my daily life, is how much more connected I am with myself,
Mm,
how much better I know who I am. Know, the phrase "know thyself," right?
yeah.
How much better I know all the different permutations and aspects of my personality and my likes and dislikes and this all that stuff. That's really what's changed or grown, let's just say, you know, in my conscious awareness over the many decades I've been meditating. That's the key. It's not so much where I've been. I've had all kinds of experiences. Talk about it in my third book, which we'll talk about later. I'm sure. I got my third book coming out in about 5 weeks. So
Congratulations.
yeah, and there are experiences in there that talk about what you're talking about. But the main thing out of the meditation is really the expansion of my conscious capacity. So another analogy that I've borrowed for God, like 40 years, I've borrowed this from this psychology professor at the University of Houston in Houston, Texas.
Mm,
And he told this to his graduate students. And then 10 years later, I taught one of his graduate students who then shared this in the meditation class that I was teaching. And this guy Jerry, who was in his the PhD student, psychology student, said, "Oh yeah, my professor said, uh, he said most people think incorrectly. Their mind is like this little 10-inch, this little 8-inch, 10-inch, this little 15, 20 centimeter bucket
mm,
with a bunch of ping pong balls." He said 8 or 10 or 15 ping pong balls bouncing in and out. The ping pong balls, the professor said, those are like your thoughts and emotions, your experiences, your visualizations, all that. That's a ping pong balls, he said, no, 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 no. He said, no, your mind is huge. It's like this big, huge Houston Astrodome down the street that they just finished building. And this was back in the 1960s. They finished this. So they just finished building this. It was the first enclosed football stadium in the world. So it was on the cover of all the magazines, all the newspapers around the world, because you could air condition it. It had a roof on it. So now
yeah.
there's probably 1,000 or I don't know, 5,000 of them around the world. But this was the very first one in the world. And so he said, go down, imagine yourself down there, down the street in this big, huge football stadium that seats 80,000 people, and it's empty, and you're there at night. And all you see down in the middle of the football field, way down on the pitch, what do you see? You see this little 8-inch bucket with 10 or 15 ping pong balls on it, because that's all you see, because there's a desk lamp over it. The rest of the stadium you can't even see because it's dark. That's your mind. You haven't lit it up, he said. So I've taken his analogy and I said, that's what I teach people to do. That's the meditation. Lights up the rest of their consciousness, their mind, their soul, their spirit, whatever you want to call it. I just use
Mm,
simple language. I call it the mind. That's what I teach people to do. So then I have people who just took my last course a week ago. They want to connect with their dead loved ones. And I have other people who want to get rid of anxiety, like I did when I first learned. I have people who want to do both. I have people all
mm,
over. Doesn't matter why. They all will get their benefit by doing this same simple technique. But ultimately, you're expanding the conscious capacity of the mind, like the psychology professor said, turning the light switches on. Now you realize, oh, my mind is huge. It's not this little
yeah.
bucket. Oh, and then your anxiety starts to dissipate.
That's right.
The chemistry in your brain and throughout your body literally changes. And I know because, like I said, when I was 20 years old, I was test subject in the experiments. They were taking blood samples and measuring the blood and so forth.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It's almost as if meditation is the reason why meditation gets rid of anxiety is because, as you said, we're that small bucket and our brain is just like, okay, it's time to expand, it's time to expand, because we're getting really rigid. We're really
Yes,
not this small. And so when you do open the rest of your mind, it's like it can free itself. So it makes so much
exactly right.
sense.
That's exactly right. And the thing is, people will thank me for teaching them, and I appreciate that. But I always remind them, I'm teaching you something that's reminding your own system to do what it already knows how to do. You're born with
Mm,
this ability.
yeah,
We've forgotten how to do it and how to turn the switch.
yeah.
And the thing is, and then it's an automatic switch. So
Mm,
think about this, the logic of this. If it's an automatic switch, like it's equally as automatic as the fight or flight switch. So that's the fight or flight switch, and then there's an opposite to the fight or flight switch. I'm teaching people how to turn on the opposite of the fight or flight switch. That's what balances everything out. Well, if it's an automatic switch, you cannot control the mind to turn on an automatic switch. And yet, so many meditation techniques are about controlling the mind. No, it makes no logical sense. I've thought about
mm,
for 40, 50 years now, and I'm like, why is it's a misapplication of waking state rules to meditation. So I
mm.
point out to my students, I say, why would you use waking state rules? What are waking state rules? Focus, concentrate, look through the windshield of the car, pay attention. Those are waking state rules. Why would you use that to teach somebody to go to sleep at night? You wouldn't. If you did, they would never get to sleep. You,
Exactly.
right? You don't use waking state rules to go to sleep. Why you use waking state rules to meditate? You should use meditation rules to learn to meditate. And that's what I teach. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you questions going back to your NDE.
Yeah.
Are you afraid of death as a result of your experience?
No, no, no. I mean, I've had the experience of since then. So in the mid 1980s, I started having experience just completely spontaneous of being on the other side
Mm,
and communicating with the other side from this side and being on the other side. So I somehow developed the ability or something to be on the other side without dying, without having an NDE. And then in the mid 1970s, I started having past life memories, again, completely spontaneously. I never had a past life regression. And my memories go back about 6,000 years. That's what my third book is about. And about 24 different lifetimes, 23, 24 lifetimes or so, approximately. So that's what my third book is coming out about. But so as a result, I don't have any fear of death and dying. I want to be here as long as I can, enjoying this side of the veil, as they call it, being here on planet Earth and my biological body. But I don't have any fears about dying. I know what's going to happen. I know I have a lot. Let's just say that the veil is very transparent for me. I can go back and forth pretty easily.
and you mentioned your past life memories. Now, I did have a look at your YouTube channel, as I mentioned earlier, and I saw that you were there with John the Baptist and Jesus. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I was with both of them. I studied with both of them back then, 2000 years
Yeah.
yeah, and actually Maharishi was John the Baptist.
Wow.
And he was the prophet Elijah in the Old Testament before that.
Okay,
So
cool.
yeah, so I know a number of his lifetimes. um I was actually with him during one of his Muslim lifetimes also. Um this is like, once you start to learn about some of these lifetimes, you realize, oh, I was a Jew, I was a Christian, I was a Muslim, I was a Buddhist, I was a what, I was a this and that. So, I think that's true, maybe not for all of us, but I think a lot of people have had a lot of exposure in different lifetimes. And it wouldn't be nice if people realized that, oh, you were an African, you were black, you were black skinned, and now you're Caucasian. Like, and
Yeah.
to broaden people's awareness and open their minds up if they had those memories like I have. So but yeah, I studied with both of them. I was with John first, and then when John baptized Jesus, he suggested that a number of us go and study with Jesus. So I was with Jesus for a while. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Do you
That
mind sharing with us what he looked like at the time, if you can recall? I had to put that one out there.
he looked, well, he didn't he wasn't Caucasian. He
Yeah,
looked,
that's right.
yeah, he was a Jew, and we were all fairly, I don't know what you would call it, darker skinned than white Caucasian-ish,
Mm.
and he had a beard and long hair and so forth, and he was a good-looking guy, but
Here's another question. Would you depict Jesus the way they've depicted him in the Bible, or would you say he was different to what he's?
he's same and different, two different things, and so I get into this in some detail in my new book.
Can you describe what that book is called? Because I might have to
Oh yeah,
grab that book.
it's called After the Afterlife. The title of my new book is going to be After the Afterlife: Memories of My Past Lives.
Wow.
After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives. So that's the title of my new book. It'll be out, available paperback and ebook fairly immediately. Paperback first and then ebook. I'm going to do an audiobook of it. My first book I have an audiobook of, and this one I'm going to do an audiobook. I'll probably eventually maybe I'll get around to doing an audiobook of my second book also. So I'm the narrator of my books. So
That's awesome.
but the thing is, yeah, to answer your question is both. So the Bible is accurate and inaccurate, and it's it to some degree. And I'd say that certainly Jesus embodied love, but
Mm.
what he taught was love. He defined love as accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were, and that includes
Yeah.
yourself also. Accepting
Mm.
yourself for who you are, not who you wish you were, or
That's
accepting the
right.
other for who they are, not who you wish they were. And so it's really an acceptance definition as opposed to a feeling definition. It's not based on love as a feeling of, because you're not going to have good feelings about somebody who's abused you. Let's just take an extreme case.
Mm.
You're not going to have a good feeling, but you can love them in the way he defined it. You can accept them for who they are and not try to change them into something they don't want to be. That's what he meant by that. And
Yeah.
because trying to change somebody into what they don't want to be is a violation of their free will choices to be who they want to be,
Mm.
even if it's abusive to you. Well,
Yeah.
what I teach in my classes is that's when you need to get the heck out of Dodge. You know what I mean? You need to say, see you later, rearview mirror. You're leaving them, in my opinion, with love, but not acceptance of their bad behavior. You're accepting who they are, which is somebody who's doing bad behavior, and you're not trying to
Mm.
change them because you can't. Only they can change themselves. Jesus would say that's loving somebody, but
Yeah.
you walk the other way if they're being abusive. Now, I have an essay this is my second book is a collection of 67 essays. So
Yeah.
in this book, it's called Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. Awesome.
So in this book on page 54, I know it because I cite the essay all the time. Forgiveness, I talk about forgiveness and love and how you can still forgive somebody, love them, and still walk away. And
Mm.
then there's, lesser degrees of that where you stay with them because it's not as bad, behavior isn't as bad, and you work it out and so forth. But you're still accepting them for who they are, not trying to change them into something else. They have to do that. And that's a responsibility to ourselves, I would say, to communicate to the other person of what our needs, hopes, wishes, and desires are. But whether they meet those or not, we don't have control over that. Right?
And being here is just a series of life lessons. Like, you yourself might not have been perfect when you were younger, as well as me and many others out there. It's life lessons. You fall short, you make mistakes, but it's about how you progress and how you see what you've done to others and how you can change yourself. And unfortunately, some aren't on that journey yet, whereas you might be.
Yeah.
And so for you to go on that journey, it's easier to forgive and forget, not so much forget, but forgive and
You
love
never forget.
others.
Never forget. That's one of the things
Yeah.
I say in the essay. Forgive and forget. Whoever said that, I understand where they're coming from, but it's wrong. You never
Mm.
forget.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, I was just swimming today, right before our interview. Now, I swim 3 days a week, and I'm doing laps. And so you're doing laps, doing my backstroke and whatever. You kind of, I know how to swim. So I'm thinking, and I thought about what you just one of the points you just raised, which is The way I think of an enlightened being is not somebody who seeks perfection.
Mm.
An enlightened being is a being, a mind, a consciousness who seeks growth and learning. Because to me, there is no such thing as perfection within ourselves or perfection in others. There's only growth, and growth is eternal. And if we seek and expect perfection in ourselves, we're going to be very disappointed. And that's when we start not loving them, because we
Yeah.
start trying to change them into this ideal, perfect image that we have of what they should be. They resent it. The relationship breaks down. That's not love in the way Jesus defined love. So back to your
Yeah.
original question. The other thing that I think is big thing that is captured in the Bible to some degree, although that definition he's asked me to, bring out a little bit more clearly now in 21st century Earth. But one thing that's really not captured is what a sharp intellect he had, an
Yeah.
incredibly sharp mind, really bright being. I mean, powerful in all the ways that one could probably imagine. He was and is, he still is. But the sharpness of his mind and his sense of humor. And did he get angry and frustrated sometimes? Yeah. Was he a perfect being in the way that we are talking about that people imagine? No, there is no perfect being. So the notion that he was perfect, he knew everything, that is false. And I
Mm.
give some stories. I share some stories in my book about some things, and people can draw their own inferences from it. But a number of us who I know who they are now on planet Earth, remember we've compared notes, and a number of us have compared notes, and we remember certain
Mm.
things independently that are the same
Yeah.
memories. So yeah, but I think what's amazing is that even though Paul derailed Jesus's teaching,
Mm.
and started creating this whole thing that's now called Christianity, it's not Jesus's teaching. What's amazing to us is to see how many of his teachings have survived,
Yeah.
notwithstanding.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I always tell people that like I'm not Christian. I do wear a cross around my neck because I believe in Jesus' teachings where he talks about love, his Sermon on the Mount. I just feel that that is such powerful teachings that that's the one thing I just love about the Bible. And that's why I love asking questions about those of you who have seen Jesus, like, what is he like? What was he really teaching? Because it resonates with me. Whereas I do know a lot of the Bible is tweaked and changed in order to,
Yeah.
what's the word? Condition us.
Yeah.
Um,
Control is the word, I think. Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep. I mean, a lot of people don't know the history. And anybody can research this. This is all historically known facts about the Bible. It was a collection and of different stories, and they became what is known as the official Bible, the King James version of the Bible, in around
Mm,
360 AD. I don't know if they called it King James Bible then, but later they called it King James Bible. But the original official Bible around 360 AD at a meeting in Nicaea, which is near Constantinople in Turkey, and the first Roman emperor, Constantine I, convened this meeting, and 300 plus early Christian bishops said, this is what's in the Bible. We're going to kick this out. We're going to put this in. We're going to not have this in, and da 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 da. And so
mm,
it was really up to them to decide. That's who decided what's in the official Bible.
yeah.
So there are a lot of things got in that not all of the 300 bishops voted on it positively, affirmatively on it. Some of them said no, we voted
Mm,
against it, but it was like they lost and it went in, that kind of thing.
yeah.
So that's the Bible. That's the New Testament. And then you have the Old Testament, of course, from Hebrew and so forth, et cetera, the ancient Hebrews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a interesting collection of stories. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people don't realize that just with the New Testament alone, the religious historians over the last, they pretty much agreed since the last 60 to 70 years, all the different religious historians have researched this. They could see that all the original pieces and stories from that were put together into the Bible that was put together in 360 AD, was written from stories, verbal stories, anywhere from they're estimating 45, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John we're talking about, 45 AD to 125 AD. So if
Yeah.
you think about that, and I've researched this because I teach a class on this, the illiteracy rate on planet Earth, they estimate, was 85 to 99% of the population was illiterate. So
Yeah.
that was 1 to 15% of the population was literate. So how did these stories get passed around? Verbally, just telling stories. So I said, has anybody ever had a kid in kindergarten, or remember when they were in kindergarten, and they're 5 or 6 years old sitting in school, and you sit around in the circle and 25 kids sit around, and the teacher goes, tell a story to the person next to you, and you see what the story is like 25 times.
Oh.
It's completely, imagine if you're doing this 45 to 125 years after Jesus dies, and you're telling these stories thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of times before anybody who knows how to write can write it down.
Yeah.
What are the stories like?
Right. But
That's a
somehow the Bible makes sense. Explain
no,
that.
well, because somebody sat down and tried to make sense of it. So
Right.
not necessarily because they had firsthand experience. Because think about it. Let's just say 125 years later. That's like somebody died in the year 1900. Okay? Somebody dies in the year 1900, and you and I are writing the Bible about them now. Who are we talking to? You and I weren't there in 1900.
That's
We're
right.
writing it, right? That's what it's like. That's what the Bible is like.
Yeah. And amen for having it, because there are some incredible teachings in that Bible, whether you
Good
are
teaching.
Christian or not. It's just so powerful. It really is.
There's some good teachings in it, and there's some stuff in it that's really not accurate. But anyway, so it's not, I don't tell people to throw it out. It's just one needs to learn discernment, is what I teach in some of my classes, not my meditation class, but my other classes. I teach how to discern, how to distinguish. Can you judge something? What tools can you use to discern? Because my goal in all of my teaching is to help people be more independent. I'm not a guru guy. I don't want followers. I want students who want to learn, and they really want to learn how to think for themselves. Because if I can help people think for themselves, I can set them up to have lifetimes, plural, of greater happiness. Because if I change their mind and how their mind thinks, and how if it can think more clearly, I don't want to change. I don't need to change their beliefs, and I don't need to change what the content is. They may forget all the content that I've shared with them in the classes, but if I've helped them change their ability to think more clearly, that they take that forever.
What is your biggest takeaway from all of this, that like all of your knowledge and meditation? What is something that you could give us as a takeaway from all that you know?
I'd say we need to relax and chillax about everything, and we got plenty of time. And yes, we should spend time in what I call the continual present. I call it the continual present because it's always changing. Oh, you just missed it, because the present is just it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
well, you missed it again. But anyway, but you're being in the present, right? I think understanding that, yes, to act now as much as we can, but don't get freaked out about stuff that we haven't finished, because we always have time to finish. So be in the moment and enjoy life as much as humanly possible. Learn, as you said earlier, and that comes from what? To me, that comes from an emotional need to understand. The more emotional the need to understand is, the more because emotions are our default. If you think about it, you can decide, I am going to change. Like people do this every January, they say, my New Year's resolution is this. They have an intellectual decision that's not emotionally based, right? And so how long do they stick with it? Oh, about 2 weeks, and that's it, right? Maybe a month if they're lucky. So the more emotionally we can align our desires with our feelings, then the more our intellectual choices are gonna bear fruit. So that's why I call that emotional need to understand. The more my understanding is based on my emotional need and my emotion, and how do you do that? Well, you do that by, what I teach is you do that by paying attention to what your emotional patterns are, and you see, okay, I'm doing this. Pay attention. Did it work or not in the way it manifest, the way I thought it through, the way my actions, my thoughts, my actions, and my behavior. Thoughts, actions, and behavior. So it goes emotions, thoughts, actions, behavior. Did it work? Did it happen? No. Oh, I need to adjust things. Okay. So we learn from that, like you were talking about earlier. That's what learning is, right? We learn through trial and error. If we don't, then we keep doing the same pattern over and over again, and we keep failing and failing and failing, and we don't meet our desires. So what that does is, when we start manifesting our desires more, not just by thinking and visioning and that's a beginning inspirational thing to people, but you just sit and imagine stuff. It's just, you're just going to live in your imaginary world, but you actually have to execute on it in our waking state world. Once you start doing that and it starts working, now you start changing your emotion, because your emotion's going, yeah, it worked. Then your emotional need to understand gets more aligned with your thoughts, actions.
Feelings and
Right?
actions. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so I have developed over these thousands of years a deep emotional need to understand stuff. I am like an information sponge. I'll go around and ask people, like, tell me about this and tell me about that. And like, I just take it in. And it's like, I have like my knowledge base is like a mile wide and an inch deep, but some people are like a mile deep and an inch wide. I'm like a mile wide. I know a lot about, I know a little about a lot of stuff. And, it's just the way I am. Not everybody is like that. Not everybody needs to be like that. I don't want to give people that impression. But the more we can move towards having our emotional, uh, our emotional desires aligned with our understanding, and having that emotional need to understand, therefore, more operative, I think that we can bring about fulfillment of our desires more readily, isn't that what happiness is all about, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your teaching, your wisdom with us today. And
Uh,
for those who are watching, if they want to get in contact with you, would you like me to link your website, Facebook?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you can do both. You can do both. I only use Facebook. I don't get on the politics or any kind of religious stuff or politics on my Facebook. I just do my nonprofit stuff on Facebook. So, but yeah, kelvinchin.org, my website, my nonprofit website. And if they go to the bottom of any page on any of my websites, I have 4 websites. They go to the bottom of the page, they'll link to all the other 3. They don't have to remember what they are, because I have a book website. I have a spiritual that's my spiritual website is kelvinchin.org. I have an Overcoming the Fear of Death website. I have my meditation website. And then my YouTube channel link is also on the bottom of any page of my websites too. So it's an easy way to get around, and people can subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Also, your books, which ones have you got available at the moment? Because I'll
So
link those as well.
yeah, so this is my first book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. And it's called Overcoming the Fear of Death. And the small print there is through each of the 4 main belief systems. So the 4 main belief systems are not religious. The 4 main belief systems are belief systems that underlie and support all the religious and cultural beliefs in the world. Because I thought, how can we talk about death and dying that doesn't step on people's religious toes or cultural toes?
Yeah.
Right. So that's when I talked with a friend of mine And he and I came up with these 4 belief systems. So real quick, the first one is a science belief. No afterlife. Don't believe in an afterlife. Okay, fine. The second one is believe in an afterlife, but fear of different things. Fear of punishment, fear of what's going to happen, all kinds of the unknown, whatever. I call it the fear of continued existence. That's the second belief system. Third belief system is belief in an afterlife, but no fear, looking forward to it, maybe. Fourth belief system is reincarnation, past lives, future lives, all that. So everybody falls somewhere in there, and sometimes people are hybrids. They may be a little mixture of this one and that one, and they're not sure. This is my second book, as we said. Marcus Aurelius updated 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. So this is a collection of 67 essays I've written on all kinds of subjects, emotions, life principles. There's 4 or 5 different chapters here. Emotions, life principles. There's a chapter on meditation with a dozen essays in it. And there's a chapter on the spiritual, which has about 25, 30 of the 60 essays, 65 essays, and 67 essays. So they're short. It's easy to read. The best way to read this book is you look at the table of contents and you see what jumps out at you.
Yeah.
Subject. Love. There's essays on love, happiness, self-interest, selfishness, giving and taking, cruelty, bullying. I'm just looking at a couple of them.
So relevant to today.
Yeah, free will, karma, ego, God, the causes of suffering, et cetera, virtue, a lot of different topics.
Yeah, incredible. I love your work. I'm so excited. I think we're going to have you back on the podcast again and just discuss a little bit more on your books and just share your knowledge, because it's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. So thank you.
It's been fun. It's been fun with Matt. Thank you for having me. Yeah.